So, today we're tackling one of the biggest challenges that any small business owner faces when it comes to content marketing. And that is the constant need to churn out fresh pieces of content while still making it valuable and still being strategic and keeping things fresh. It can be really overwhelming. If it's your first time here, welcome. My name is Sumantha McMahon, and today I'm going to talk about how we can get started with planning 1 year's worth of content from a strategic point of view so that ultimately your content serves its purpose. It makes connections, it forms relationships, and it sells. Welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm your host, Samantha, and I'm so pleased you're here. As an education business owner myself and a former teacher, I understand the nuances that only apply to us. So in this podcast, I share fluff-free, tailored and actionable ideas that you can mould to suit your needs. If you'd like to take this conversation further, please do reach out. I would love to meet you. And finally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. That way, you'll be helping me help more people. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy. So, content is important. And I'm not just talking about social media, I'm talking about any form of content. Whenever you're creating content, we might be thinking about things like our email marketing, we might be thinking about websites, we might be thinking about blogging. But what I want to help you do is put together one whole year's plan so that it's cohesive and you know what to say and when, so that you can work backwards from that rather than scrambling around trying to work out what you should talk about. If you're in the Tutors Mastermind, then we are going to be doing an in-depth action-focused session on this in November. If you're not in the mastermind, it's not too late to join. You can do so using the link in the comments. Remember, all the live training is recorded and then it's uploaded, so you can access everything straight away. So to create a content plan that will really serve your business, the very first thing we have to identify is what purpose it serves. The way I think about content marketing is that it's a really good way to connect with ideal clients. It's a powerful method of establishing yourself as an authority, really boosting your credibility, and it's actually a really vital way of staying front of mind. So I mentioned that it's a really good way of attracting your ideal client, but inversely, it's also a really good way of gatekeeping to make sure that you're also not attracting the kind of people who are never going to be your customer. You don't want to be spending time on things like discovery calls with people who have no intention of buying from you, or maybe you're just not compatible. So you can actually use your content to filter out the right people so that the right people are entering your world. So whether you are a private tutor or you're running a small education business with a team, your content will help you build relationships and trust. And the useful thing about it is that people will feel like they have met you before they've actually met you. It builds that trust long before the sales conversation happens. So here's the plan for today's episode. I've designed this in a way so that if you are in the Tutors Mastermind, this will give you a head start to November's session. But if you're not in the Mastermind and you have no intention of joining, then this will still get you started in putting together that 1 year plan. As always, I'll just remind you, the link to join is in the show notes. And it's a flexible membership. There's no long-term commitment. You can join and leave and rejoin whenever you want. So let's get started. Now, as we construct our plan, what we want is at the forefront of our minds, we want to make space for spontaneous content, stuff that's really relevant right now. So, for example, last week I went to the Tutors Association conference. I want to make space in my plan to be able to talk about that because it's really current. But I also want to be scheduled in advance so that I'm not always having to produce fresh pieces of content so that this becomes really sustainable. But even though I want to pre-schedule content, I don't necessarily want that to be just full of generic content. I still need to make those connections. So we're trying to find a balance here. We're trying to find a balance between having stuff pre-planned that's still going to be valuable, but having room for spontaneous content as well. If we have too much of one and not enough of the other, then we risk either not making it sustainable or we risk it not being valuable and not really connecting with our audience and just not really working hard for us. I want to help you stop relying on luck. I want to help you stop thinking, what do I post, and wondering whether it's even going to work. And I want to help you avoid burnout so that you can stay really consistent for a long time. So, this yearly plan is actually really empowering. Imagine knowing exactly what you need to talk about each month. How much stress would that take off your plate? So, when you plan that year's worth of content, it becomes really intentional. It's strategic and it ties in with your bigger business goals. Right, I'm going to start with the part that I seem to start a lot of these kinds of episodes with, and that is knowing your audience. But this isn't as simple as it sounds, especially for tutors. Because we often teach a range of ages. Some of you listening might even teach multiple subjects. Then we have the possible addition if you hire tutors. You aren't necessarily selling on behalf of just yourself. And if that isn't complicated enough, we're also in the position where we are often working with children, but the people we're speaking to are the parents. They're the people making the decision. Now, mixed in with all of this, we need to show our expertise. We need to give value. So, how do we do it that connects all of the decision makers and all of those different moving parts together? So, let's have a look at how you can actually really zoom in to figuring out where you should be pitching your content. Before you plan any content, you should have a crystal clear idea of who you're talking to. Who are your ideal clients? Are they parents looking for a tutoring for their children? Are they adult learners? Are they seeking professional qualifications? Maybe they are education business owners themselves. This makes a really huge difference to how you present your content and what you talk about. For instance, if you speak to parents who are looking for a tutor for their child, you want to give value in a way that shows your expertise and to give them quick wins. But then subject specific help might be useful. Maybe they'll pass it on to their children. It really depends on the age group and the thing that you're teaching. I know that when I speak to my entrance exam parents, they have a lot of input. So actually sharing academic tips is very useful. Whereas with my GCSE parents, they often aren't quite so involved. So I need to take a slightly different approach while still showing my expertise. Something that really helped with them was when I shared really quick wins, always using language that I know my audience is going to understand. And then the call to action that I would often have would be to save this post and show it to your child. Sometimes I would say, book a discovery call with me. But the point is, I was directing them as to what to do with that piece of content. So that's just one example, but you can see that having a really clear idea of who you're speaking to is really crucial, because to cut through the noise, to be able to cut through the noise and stand out amongst a sea of other tutors, you want to connect with that person who you want to work with, and you need to tell them what to do. So on that note, it's a really good idea to have a very clear idea of exactly what they're struggling with and how they feel about it. So running with that example of when you're speaking to a parent who is looking for a tutor for their child, we need to think about what their child might be experiencing, but also what they're experiencing. So you might write something to connect with people who are struggling with confidence. Your hook might be, is your child struggling with confidence in English? And then when you're thinking about the parent, you want to think about how they're feeling about it. Are you feeling lost as to how you can help your child re-engage with English? So when you're planning 1 year's worth of content, you want to plan these types of pieces according to what's happening in the year. We want to meet people where they're at. So I would tailor my language to be more exam focused if it's exam season. I would tailor it if it was the beginning of the academic year and I'm speaking to people about settling in to the new academic year. The principles remain the same regardless of when you're publishing that content. If you are speaking to someone who's taking an exam and you want them to invest in what you're offering, you need to show that you understand the problems that they are facing. So you need to understand who it is you're speaking to. You need to understand the position that your learners are in, and you need to understand the position that your decision makers are in. You want to tie that all together by making sure that your content is relevant to the time of year and what the important thing that they're experiencing is. So now it's time to add some strategy to your content plan and into your goals. Without this part, you'll be posting great content, but it won't serve its purpose. It won't be attracting clients to you. Now, selling all the time is exhausting and it's unrealistic. So it's useful to have periods when you sell and use other periods to do things like boosting your visibility, to nurturing your audience, to keeping them warm, to growing your audience. It sets the stage up to be really effective when you do arrive at that sales period. It's also really useful to ask yourself what your business goals are for the year ahead. So, are you launching something new? If so, how can you position yourself as an authority in that field so that your audience already see you as an expert before you've actually even started talking about that thing you're launching? Is there a specific thing you want to boost numbers for? If so, think about how you can hone into that and get people really excited about the impact that you make. So that's step one. That's a big step where you're defining your audience, their pain points, and your business goals. So now it's time to move on to step two. Now, this is all about thinking about how you can create things like content themes or pillars. They're often given different names, but the principle is quite similar. There are lots of different ways to organize your content so that it's cohesive rather than random. If you speak about something different all the time, your messaging just won't stick. People need to see the same thing over and over to actually remember it. Bear in mind, on places like social media, only a proportion of the people you're connected with will see your content. Sometimes it will vary, so you do want to keep circling around the same messaging. So, one of those ways is to create content pillars. And that's essentially where you define your core messages and you just keep circling around them. You keep talking about them in different ways. Another is to perhaps create themes. If you're in the Tutors Mastermind, there is some in depth training about these approaches. So, head over to the content, convert browsers to buyers section of the Mastermind area. So, I've talked about content pillars in past episodes, so I'll focus a little more on themes and how you can use that to help plan your year's worth of content. Now, themes help you break your content plan into very targeted and manageable chunks. Perhaps you do monthly themes, you could do fortnightly ones, you could even do weekly ones. Either way, blocking out time periods and focusing on just one core topic or one core message is a really great way of making your messaging memorable, but also creating this thread through all of your content so that they all kind of join together and they're all very logical. And themes are essentially overarching topics that connect to your audience's needs as well as your business objectives. For example, January could be all about goal setting for learning success, which ties into parents' new year energy or how students might be feeling after their mock exams. March could focus on exam preparation strategies if you're working with, say, GCSE students, while another month could be all about navigating end of term fatigue. These themes essentially can guide your month's worth of content. So let's look at an example. Let's imagine you're an education business that specializes in supporting students with special educational needs. Your monthly themes might look like January, you might be talking about setting goals for SEN students. March, maybe engaging learning techniques for SEN learners. June might be about summer learning activities, how to keep your skills well oiled for SEN students. And in September, it could be about back to school tips and how to settle in and what resources should you be looking out for in school. And also, how could you help? You could welcome parents to come and speak to you for advice. In the past, I've talked about sales boosts, and when I talk about seasonal income dips and mitigating them, one of the ideas is to have specific periods in the year where you offer something special. So if your books are full and you don't really have time to add anything to your workload, just every now and again, seasonally, you can offer these things that give you sales boosts and you can kind of put that money aside. So with this example, let's imagine we're talking about back to school tips for SEN parents. You might even run some consultation calls, some paid consultation calls with parents, just advising them. So by focusing on a different theme, let's say each month, you avoid feeling scattered and your content will start feeling like it's part of a bigger, more meaningful conversation. Now it's time for step 3, and this is all about keeping repeating those messages, but also making content marketing really sustainable. So when you've planned your year's worth of content, and when I say year's worth of content, it doesn't mean that you've written every single piece, but you have a plan that steers what you're going to write, and it makes writing it very easy and fast. We also want to think about how we can keep that going because content marketing is a kind of forever thing, isn't it? So when you've planned that year's worth of content, whether you've used themes or content pillars, don't forget to use time-saving strategies. It's not cheating. You can save time without compromising on the quality of what you're putting out there. So here's a little secret. You don't have to produce a fresh, brand new piece of content every single time. Repurposing is your best friend. So, for example, one blog post could become a podcast episode or a video, several social media posts, as well as an email newsletter. That's just one idea, one piece of content that repurposes, that multiplies into several pieces of content. So, as you plan, think about how you can repurpose key pieces of content. Sometimes these are called cornerstone content, where you maybe have your pillars and you have a big piece of content that really communicates those key messages. Let's say it's in the form of a blog post. You can then break that up into smaller pieces of content, like a carousel for Instagram or even for LinkedIn or a post on Facebook or however you choose to do it. You can break that one piece up into lots of different pieces. And you don't have to use different formats and different platforms if you don't want to. You can still present the same piece of content in lots of different ways. You can still repeat your message. Now, I know I keep referring to the Tutors Mastermind in this episode, but I do have a lot of training on this on there. So if you are a masterminder, head over to the content section and you'll see there is some hands-on training where you will actually produce these pieces of content in the session and you'll walk away with publishable pieces of content. If you're watching or listening to this episode in real time on the Monday that it's released, then coming up is a live session on planning 1 year's worth of content. But again, you can join whenever and you'll still be able to access it. So let me run through a few repurposing examples, just so you can see how extensively you can use this to save time. So let's say you created a blog post in February about 5 tips for helping students build strong study habits. You could turn it into a YouTube video. You could break each tip down into short social media posts. You could record a very quick podcast episode, expanding on each point. You could create a downloadable checklist to share with your email list. You could actually revisit it a year later or later on in the year and give it a little freshen up, give it a refresher. By squeezing every drop of value out of just one piece of content, you are saving time and energy while still giving your audience multiple ways to consume your insights. Okay, so you've mapped out your themes, you know your ideal customers, you understand their pain points, you have a repurposing plan. Now it's time to think about plugging it all into a content calendar so that it's nice and organized. Now, I like using ClickUp, and I also use this in combination with my social media scheduler. But you can use anything. You can use Trello, Asana, Google Sheets. You can use a document just to map out each month. So things I find useful to have in the calendar are things like what kind of content you're going to publish, where you're publishing it. So is it on a particular social media platform? Is it a blog? Is it a video? Also, when it's going live, again, just taking away some of the thinking. And by having everything laid out, you avoid that last minute scramble of what should I post today? Something else that I often advise is putting key dates in the calendar so you can work backwards from those. Now, I talked about repurposing as a real time saver. Another time saver is to batch create your content. Now that you have a plan, you don't have to worry about your content not being specific enough because you know the key points in the year, you're making sure you're using the right language. If you set aside, let's say, a few hours each week just to start with, or every fortnight. In fact, I advise people to start with setting aside an hour a week. When they then get ahead, they can reduce that to fortnightly. And then eventually you can do what I do and only really create content once a month for, at least for social media. That's what I do. Now, what this does is it frees up your mental space. It ensures you stay consistent, and actually creating lots of pieces of content for one specific platform in one sitting is a lot easier than it sounds because you're already in the zone. You're not switching between lots of different tasks. So the step 5 here, the kind of last step, is to really track your performance so you can measure and tweak your strategy. Just because you've laid out a 1-year content plan doesn't mean that you set it and forget it. Because for this to really work, you have to treat it like an experiment. It could be that you tried something last month that worked brilliantly, but for whatever reason, the following month it doesn't. And so you have to be able to monitor what you're doing and try and change what you're doing and be adaptable. So looking at metrics like engagements, like click-throughs, like conversions can be helpful. I don't believe in taking a really data-centric approach. In fact, just this morning, I shared with the masterminders how I went on Instagram and I looked at when my audience were most active. Now, for years, I've been publishing content at 11 a.m. And the data told me that they were most active at 6 p.m. So I decided for a month I would experiment, and I changed the time that I was publishing my content. And it flopped. My content was barely getting any reach. It was barely getting the engagement. The minute I switched it back to 11 a.m., my results increased. So data can be useful, but it's important to take it with a pinch of salt and actually experiment and kind of form your own data and use that to steer your decisions. But it can definitely be useful to analyze your content and just see what kind of content is performing really well and why. Are there any patterns? So on certain platforms, on a lot of platforms actually, you'll find that when you share a picture of yourself, often the engagement is boosted, but often people stop and they actually read and they write comments. So look for patterns and try and identify what's going really well, and then multiply that, optimize that. Now then, as I mentioned earlier, if you want a really in-depth session on doing this, on planning your year and being really strategic, come and join us in the mastermind. You're just a couple of clicks away. You can leave, you can rejoin, you can do whatever you want. You can use the membership as you wish. But let me round this up with some final thoughts, just to summarize what we've been talking about. To recap, it's important to start by understanding your audience and your business goals. Both of those things need to tie together if you want your content to work really hard for you. Secondly, think about how you can create things like monthly themes or specific content pillars to keep your content targeted and focused. Remember to use time-saving techniques to repurpose your content just to really get the most out of your efforts. Number 4, use a content calendar to stay organized, to stay consistent, and to stay really relevant. And number 5, measure your results and be willing to adapt. So by planning a year's worth of content, you're not just reducing stress, you're actually creating a sustainable system that keeps your business visible and valuable, and it keeps it growing. Plus, it gives you more time to focus on what you love, which is teaching, coaching, and just making a real impact. So if you found today's session helpful, please share it with someone else who you think would find it useful as well. And if you have a quick moment, please do leave a review. Thanks as always for spending your time with me, and you'll hear from me on Wednesday. Would you like to take this discussion further? Perhaps you have some questions or you'd like more ideas on tailoring your business. If so, book a free discovery call through the link in the show notes.